The Ajayi family's anniversary party was a grand affair with laughter and music filling the air. Friends and neighbors gathered to honor Funmi and Dele, a couple admired for their strong marriage and warm presence in the village of Ilorin. Dele, the charismatic host, charmed everyone with his hearty laugh, while Funmi greeted guests with her usual poise and grace. Dressed in a shimmering blue gown, she was the epitome of elegance, but beneath her warm smiles, a growing unease simmered. The evening unfolded in celebration. Children danced to the rhythm of the drummers, elders shared stories under the baobab tree, and women exchanged compliments and gossip. Yet, as Funmi moved through the crowd, something caught her eye. At the edge of the gathering, a tall figure lingered in the shadows. Her breath hitched as recognition struck. Kunal. Her heart raced as memories of her past came rushing back. Kunal had been a part of her life she had buried long ago, a reminder of difficult times she had escaped. He was a figure tied to pain and mistakes she had worked tirelessly to leave behind. Funmi froze, unable to take her eyes off him. His presence felt like an omen, threatening to shatter the life she had built with Dele. As their eyes met briefly, Kunal's face was unreadable. He stood still, watching her before he slipped away into the night. Funmi forced herself to return her attention to the guests, but her mind was elsewhere. When Dele approached her with concern, asking if she was all right, she managed a forced smile and excused herself, claiming she was tired. Later, as the festivities began to wind down, a young boy approached Funmi with a small package. "Auntie Funmi," he said innocently, "a man told me to give this to you." Her hands trembled as she took the package, already suspecting who had sent it. She waited until she was alone to unwrap it. Inside, she found an old photograph, a picture of her and Kunal, taken years ago when her life was very different. Accompanying it was a note that sent chills down her spine. "Tell them the truth or I will." Funmi's knees felt weak as the implications of the note sank in. She had worked so hard to create a life with Dele, built on trust and respect. Now the secret she had buried threatened to resurface and destroy everything. Why was Kunal here after all these years? And what did he hope to gain from dredging up the past? As she tucked the photograph and note back into the package, Funmi forced herself to rejoin the party. She couldn't let her turmoil show, not tonight. Guests continued to shower her and Dele with admiration, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her. As the last of the guests left and the house fell quiet, Funmi lay awake beside Dele, her thoughts racing. The note's chilling words replayed in her mind. "Tell them the truth or I will." The evening that began as a celebration of love now felt like the start of a nightmare. Funmi stared at the ceiling, knowing her perfect life was at risk of crumbling. The days ahead would demand decisions she wasn't ready to face, but one thing was certain: her secret would not remain hidden for much longer. The house was quiet after the last of the anniversary decorations had been cleared. Funmi sat in her bedroom, staring at the small package left for her by the man from her past. Her hands trembled as she carefully unwrapped the plain brown paper, revealing its contents: a faded photograph and a note. Her heart sank the moment she saw the photo. It was her younger self standing beside Kunal, a man she had desperately tried to leave behind. The note was short but chilling. "Tell them the truth or I will." The words seemed to leap off the page, each one heavier than the last. Funmi's chest tightened as she clutched the note, her mind racing. Kunal was back, and he was threatening to unravel the life she had worked so hard to build. She stared at the photograph, memories rushing back unbidden, her struggles, her fear, and the toxic relationships she had escaped. She had reinvented herself, leaving Kunal and that part of her life behind when she married Dele. Now it felt as though the past had reached out and grabbed her, threatening to drag her under. Funmi looked at Dele, peacefully asleep on the bed. Guilt stabbed at her as she thought about the man who had always trusted her. Their marriage, their family, had been her safe haven, a life built on the belief that the past was behind her. She thought of their children, Toby and Neka, and the joy they had shared just hours earlier at the celebration. The idea of Kunal disrupting their lives filled her with dread. Her mind whirled with questions. Why had Kunal come back after all these years? What did he want? Was it money, revenge, or something worse? She thought of the power he now held over her. This secret, this photograph, could shatter everything. Her thoughts shifted to Dele. Should she tell him the truth? Could she risk his love and trust by revealing something she had hidden for so long, or should she face Connell alone, handling his threats without pulling Dale into the storm? Funmi paced the room, her thoughts in turmoil. Connell had always been manipulative, and she feared what he might do if she didn't act quickly. Yet confronting him felt like walking into the lion's den. She glanced at the note again, the ultimatum pressing on her like a weight she couldn't lift. The decision she had to make seemed impossible. Either way, the life she cherished was at risk. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the curtains, Funmi tucked the photograph and note back into the package and hid it in a drawer. She couldn't afford to panic. She would have to confront Connell to understand his intentions and figure out how to protect her family. But the thought of facing him again made her stomach churn. Lying down beside Dell, Funmi stared at the ceiling, sleep impossible. The secret she had buried so carefully was no longer hers to control. One way or another, the truth would come out. Now all she could do was prepare for the battle ahead. Long before the joy-filled anniversary celebrations and the security of her life with Dell, Funmi's world was marred by pain and darkness. The photograph and ominous note from Connell dredged up memories she had worked tirelessly to bury. Her mind raced back to the years she had fought so hard to escape. At 19, Funmi met Connell, a charismatic and confident man who promised her the world. Coming from a poor background, she saw him as her escape from hardship. At first, his charm and grand dreams captivated her, and she imagined a future full of possibilities. However, Connell's facade quickly began to crumble. The warmth he had initially shown turned into cold control and sharp criticism. His words, once sweet, turned cutting. "You should be grateful I chose you," he would say, his tone laced with disdain. As their relationship deepened, Connell's true nature emerged. He monitored her every move, isolated her from family and friends, and demanded absolute obedience. Disobedience or questioning his authority brought verbal abuse, and occasionally, his anger turned physical. After each incident, he would apologize, his voice heavy with mock remorse. "I don't mean to hurt you, Funmi," he would say, "but you push me." Funmi, trapped in a cycle of fear and hope, stayed longer than she should have. Each day, she felt her identity and dreams slipping away under the weight of Connell's control. Fear of his threats, "If you ever leave, I'll find you," kept her rooted in place. The breaking point came one night after Connell lashed out in a violent rage over a trivial argument. Funmi, bruised and broken, knew she could no longer endure his cruelty. As she lay awake that night, a resolve grew within her. She would escape, no matter the cost. In the weeks that followed, Funmi secretly saved small amounts of money from the household allowance Connell gave her. She hid her plans behind a mask of obedience, waiting for the perfect moment to flee. When Connell left for a business trip, she saw her chance. Packing a small bag with only the essentials, Funmi boarded a bus headed to a neighboring town, leaving behind everything she had known. She eventually arrived in Ilorin, a city that felt like a sanctuary compared to the life she had fled. Funmi found work as a seamstress and began rebuilding her life, one stitch at a time. But she struggled to make ends meet. She felt a freedom she hadn't known in years. With every passing day, she regained a piece of herself. Years later, Funmi met Dele, a kind and steady man who treated her with respect and tenderness. For the first time, she felt safe. She didn't tell them about Connell, not out of mistrust, but because she wanted to leave that chapter of her life behind. Dele became her partner in every sense of the word, and together they built a home filled with love and laughter. Their children brought her joy, and the pain of her past faded into a distant memory. But now as she sat in her bedroom staring at the photograph and note, Funmi realized the past wasn't as distant as she had believed. Connell had found her, and his return threatened everything she had built. The fear she thought she had left behind returned with a vengeance, and she knew she couldn't ignore it. This time, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting to protect her family and the life she had fought so hard to create. Funmi resolved to confront Connell, no matter the cost. She had escaped him once before, and she was determined to do it again. Funmi's life spiraled into a storm of fear and anxiety after Connell's letter. She did her best to appear composed at home, masking the turmoil brewing inside her, but the looming threat of Connell's return consumed her thoughts. Each passing day felt like a countdown to disaster. Connell didn't wait long to make his presence known. One evening, as Funmi closed her sewing shop, he emerged from the shadows. Dressed sharply, his smirk carried the same menacing charm that once kept her trapped in his grasp. "You've done well for yourself," Kunnel remarked casually, his voice dripping with mockery. "Nice home, loving husband, beautiful kids, but it all comes at a price. My silence, for example." Funmi's heart sank. "What do you want, Kunnel?" she demanded. "Money," he said bluntly, stepping closer. "You walked away, Funmi, and I let you go. Now I'm here to collect. Pay up, or your husband hears everything." Funmi's voice shook as she replied, "I don't have the money you're asking for." "You'll figure it out," Kunnel sneered. "You always do. You have 1 week, Funmi. Don't test me." His words cut deep, leaving Funmi trembling as he disappeared into the night. She felt trapped, unsure how to protect her family from the man she once fled. In the following days, Funmi's behavior became increasingly erratic. She was distant, her mind clouded with worry. Dele noticed the shift immediately. Concerned, he tried to reach out, but Funmi brushed off his questions, insisting she was fine. Yet her late-night phone calls and hushed conversations didn't escape his attention. The tipping point came when Funmi announced she needed to run an errand in town. Dele, unable to ignore his suspicions, decided to follow her. Keeping his distance, he trailed her car through Ilorin's dimly lit streets. When she pulled into a secluded parking lot near an old warehouse, Dele parked nearby, his heart racing. From the shadows, Dele watched as another figure emerged and followed Funmi inside. His heart sank when he recognized Kunnel, the same man who had appeared at their anniversary party. Dele's mind raced with questions. Who was this man? Why was Funmi meeting him? Inside the warehouse, Funmi faced Kunnel with a mix of fear and defiance. "I told you I don't have your money," she said. Kunnel chuckled darkly. "Then figure out a way to get it, or your perfect little world comes crashing down." Before Funmi could respond, a voice interrupted them. "What's going on here?" Both Funmi and Kunnel turned to see Dele standing in the doorway, his expression a mix of anger and betrayal. "Funmi, who is this man? And why are you here with him?" Funmi's heart dropped. She struggled to find the words. "Dele, I can explain." Kunnel smirked, stepping forward. "Ah, the husband. Funmi and I go way back. Isn't that right, Funmi?" "Shut up, Kunnel," Funmi snapped, her voice breaking. "This is between me and my husband." Dele's eyes darted between them, his voice firm. "Funmi, tell me the truth." Taking a deep breath, Funmi met Dele's gaze. "He's my past," she said, "and I never wanted him to be part of my life again." Kunnel seized the moment. "She owes me," he said with a smirk. "And if she doesn't pay, I'll make sure everyone knows who she really is." Dele's fists clenched at his sides. "You're not going to hurt my family," he said through gritted teeth, his voice calm but dangerous. Funmi, overwhelmed by the chaos, realized she could no longer run from her past. She had to face the consequences of her silence and fight to protect the life she had built with Dele. The confrontation left her shaken but resolute. She would not let Kunnel destroy her family. The drive home was thick with silence, tension radiating from both Dele and Funmi. Dale's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his jaw set in anger, while Funmi sat stiffly, her hands trembling in her lap. She knew there was no avoiding the confrontation that awaited them. When they arrived home, Dele stepped out of the car without a word. Funmi hesitated before following him inside, her heart pounding with fear and guilt. The house was quiet, the children were asleep, but the atmosphere was heavy. Dele stood in the living room, staring out the window, his back to her. "Who is he, Funmi?" Dele finally asked, his voice low and clipped. Funmi swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Dele, please let me explain." "Then explain," he snapped, turning to face her. His eyes burned with anger and hurt. "I just saw my wife meeting another man in secret. Who is he?" Funmi sank onto the couch, her hands clasped tightly together. She took a deep breath before speaking. "His name is Kunnel," she admitted. "He's someone from my past." Dele's eyes narrowed, confusion mingling with his fury. "Your past? What does that mean? Why haven't you ever mentioned him?" Funmi hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "Because I didn't want you to know," she said softly. "Kunnel, we were in a relationship before I met you. But it was a toxic, abusive relationship. I left him, Dele. I ran away to start over. Dale's expression shifted, but his anger didn't wane. And you thought it was okay to hide this from me? To let a man like that come back into your life and threaten us? Tears filled Funmi's eyes. I didn't know he would find me, she said. I thought I'd left that part of my life behind. When Kunnel showed up, he started demanding money. He's blackmailing me, Dale. He said he'd expose everything if I didn't pay him. Dale shook his head, his frustration evident. And instead of coming to me, you decided to handle it alone? To meet him in secret and let him dictate the terms. Do you have any idea how this makes me feel? Funmi's voice broke as she pleaded with him. I was scared, Dale. I didn't want to drag you into this mess. I thought I could protect you and the kids. Dale paced the room, running a hand through his hair. You didn't trust me, Funmi. You didn't trust me to stand by you, to help you. Do you know how much that hurts? I do trust you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want you to look at me differently. Dale stopped pacing and turned to her, his voice calmer but still heavy with emotion. Funmi, I've always looked at you as my partner, the woman I could share everything with. But now, I feel like I don't even know you. Funmi stood, wiping her tears. I made mistakes, Dale. I kept things from you because I was trying to protect us. But I swear, everything I've done was out of love for you and our family. Dale's shoulders sagged, his anger giving way to exhaustion. I need time to process this, he said finally. I can't just pretend everything is fine. Funmi nodded, her heart breaking. Take all the time you need, she said quietly. But please don't give up on us. That night, Dale sat alone in the bedroom, his mind racing. The image of Funmi meeting Kunnel replayed in his mind, mingled with her tearful confession. He wanted to believe her, to trust that her actions were born out of fear and not betrayal. But the wounds were fresh, and his faith in their relationship had been shaken. In the living room, Funmi lay curled up on the couch, unable to sleep. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, wondering if she could have handled things differently. The weight of Dale's words pressed down on her, and she hated herself for the pain she had caused him. As dawn broke, neither of them had found peace. Funmi knew that the road to mending their relationship would be long and uncertain, and Dale struggled to reconcile his love for her with the betrayal he felt. But for the sake of their family, they both knew they had to face the challenges ahead. Whether together or apart, their lives would never be the same. The days following Kunnel's reappearance were some of the darkest in Funmi's life. His threats grew more menacing, his demands escalating with each visit. The mask of charm he had once worn was gone, replaced by an unrelenting menace. One afternoon, he showed up uninvited at her back door, his eyes cold and calculating. Funmi, he said, leaning against the doorframe. You've had enough time to think. Where's my money? Funmi's voice trembled as she replied, I don't have that kind of money, Kunnel. Please, leave me and my family alone. Kunnel's chuckle was icy. You think this is a game? If you don't pay me, I'll make sure your husband, your children, and the entire village know the truth. Let's see how long that perfect little life of yours lasts. The threat sent a chill down Funmi's spine. She wanted to scream, to push him out, but fear kept her rooted to the spot. Kunnel smirked, satisfied with the power he held over her. 2 days, he said before leaving. Don't disappoint me. As the door closed behind him, Funmi sank into a chair, overwhelmed by despair. The life she had fought so hard to build felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She spent sleepless nights agonizing over what to do. Paying Kunnel would only encourage him to keep demanding more, but the thought of her past being exposed terrified her. Meanwhile, Dele grew increasingly suspicious. Funmi's anxious behavior, her evasive answers, and the tension that filled their home were impossible to ignore. Determined to find out what was going on, Dele began discreetly asking questions around the village. He soon learned that Kunnel had been seen near their home and asking about Funmi. His inquiries revealed even more troubling information. Kunnel was a known con artist with a history of preying on vulnerable people. Stories of his manipulation and deceit painted a picture of a dangerous man, far more sinister than Dele had imagined. Armed with this knowledge, Dele confronted Funmi one evening. Placing a folder of notes and photographs on the table, he demanded answers. Who is Kunnel? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Funmi froze, her heart pounding. Dele, no more lies, Funmi, he interrupted. I know he's been here. I know he's threatening you. I need to know the truth. Funmi's shoulders sagged under the weight of her secrets. She looked at Dele with tear-filled eyes. He's someone from my past, she admitted. Someone I thought I'd left behind forever. Dele sat across from her, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. Why did you try to face this alone? I was scared, Funmi said, her voice breaking. I didn't want you to know about him or the person I used to be. I thought I could handle it. Dele reached for her hand. Funmi, you're my wife. Whatever you're facing, we face it together, but I need to know everything. With trembling words, Funmi recounted her history with Kunnel, the abuse, the manipulation, and the fear that had driven her to flee. Dele listened in silence, his anger at her secrecy softened by the pain in her voice and the realization of how much she had endured. We'll handle this together, he said when she finished. Kunnel doesn't get to control our lives. We'll find a way to stop him. For the first time in days, Funmi felt a spark of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. Together, she and Dele would face Kunnel and protect their family. But as they prepared for the battle ahead, they knew the fight was far from over. The days following Funmi's confession were a blur of tension and pain. The Ajayi household, once filled with warmth and laughter, became cold and silent. Dale's calm and composed demeanor cracked, and Funmi, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, struggled to hold her family together. Their arguments began quietly but grew sharper with each passing day. Why didn't you tell me, Funmi? Dele demanded one evening. You should have trusted me with the truth. I was scared, Funmi replied, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want to lose you. I thought I could bury the past and start over. Dale's expression hardened. But you lied to me, Funmi. Our marriage was built on trust. Or so I thought. Now I don't even know who you are. The distance between them widened, and their children began to notice. Why are Mama and Papa always upset? Teo asked one evening, his voice tinged with worry. The question broke Funmi's heart, but she was too consumed by the growing rift with Dele to find the words to comfort him. Dele, unable to contain his frustration, began spending more time away from home. He claimed he needed space to think, leaving Funmi to manage the household alone. The emptiness in the house grew heavier with each passing day. One evening, Dele came home late and stood in the doorway, his expression conflicted. I need time, Funmi, he said. I can't think clearly when I'm here. You're leaving us? Funmi asked, her voice trembling. I'm not leaving the family, he replied. I just need to figure things out. The door closing behind him felt like the end of something precious. Funmi sank to the floor, tears spilling freely as the weight of her loneliness engulfed her. Dele, now staying with a friend, found little solace in his self-imposed exile. His mind raced with memories of Funmi, their children, and the life they had built. Why couldn't she trust me? He wondered aloud one night. His friend, Kunnel, offered quiet advice. Marriage isn't about perfection. It's about resilience. The question is, do you still want to fight for her? Dele couldn't answer immediately. Though angry and hurt, he realized he still loved Funmi. The thought of losing her left an ache he couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Funmi faced Kunnel's threats and the judgment of the village alone. The whispers grew louder. She had secrets, some said. Others defended her, but the scrutiny was unbearable. Funmi focused on her children, trying to shield them from the chaos. The turning point came when Teo called Dele one evening. Papa, when are you coming home? Mama misses you. Dale's heart broke at his son's innocent words. Soon, he promised. Hanging up, Dele realized he couldn't abandon his family. He resolved to return, knowing the road to healing would be long and fraught with challenges. But he was ready to face them and rebuild what had been broken. Funmi sat in her dimly lit living room, her mind racing with fear and determination. Kunnel's demands had escalated, and the threats to expose her past were unbearable. She knew she couldn't continue living in his shadow, but protecting her family was her priority. After days of sleepless nights, she decided to confront him and put an end to the blackmail. The next day, she called Kunnel. I have the money, she said, masking her anxiety. Meet me at the old warehouse by the river tomorrow evening. Kunnel's chuckle on the other end sent chills down her spine. Good, but don't try anything stupid. Funmi hung up and took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. What she didn't know was that Dele had been watching her closely. His concern for her safety outweighed his anger and confusion about her recent strange behavior. Suspecting she was in danger, he decided to follow her. The following evening, Funmi parked near the abandoned warehouse and stepped out, clutching a bag filled with cash. The air was heavy with the smell of damp wood and rust. Inside, Kunnel leaned against a rusted beam, his smirk infuriatingly confident. "You made the right choice," he said as she approached, his eyes gleaming. Funmi stood her ground. "Here's the money. Take it and leave me and my family alone. This ends now." Kunnel laughed darkly. "You think a bag of cash can make me forget everything I know about you? You're still as naive as ever." Her heart pounded, but she refused to let him see her fear. "You have no power over me anymore, Kunnel. I'm not the same woman you used to control." Kunnel's expression turned cold and he stepped closer. "Careful, Funmi," he hissed. "You don't want to push me." Before he could take the bag, a voice cut through the tense silence. "Step away from her." Both Funmi and Kunnel turned to see Dale emerge from the shadows, his expression fierce and unyielding. He placed himself between Funmi and Kunnel, his presence a shield of protection. "If you want to threaten someone, threaten me," Dale said, his voice calm but commanding. Kunnel sneered, his bravado cracking. "Do you even know who your wife really is?" "I know enough," Dale replied firmly. "And I know that you're a coward preying on her fear. This ends tonight." Kunnel faltered, his gaze darting between the two. "You think you can scare me?" he scoffed. "I don't need to scare you," Dale said, stepping forward. "But I will protect my wife and family, no matter what it takes. Whatever control you think you have over her is gone." Kunnel hesitated, his confidence wavering in the face of Dale's resolve. After a tense moment, he backed away, muttering, "You'll regret this," before disappearing into the night. The warehouse fell silent, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves outside. Funmi's legs threatened to give way, and she let out a shaky breath. Dale turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "I'm so sorry, Dale," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." Dale placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We'll face this together," he said. "But no more secrets, Funmi. We need to rebuild together." As they left the warehouse, the tension in the air seemed to lift. Though the road ahead was uncertain, Funmi felt a newfound sense of hope. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone in her fight. The darkness of her past had begun to give way to the light of a united future. The warehouse was dimly lit, its shadows stretching across the walls as Funmi and Dele faced Kunnel. The tension was palpable, every word exchanged heavy with unspoken threats. Kunnel, emboldened by his arrogance, stood with a smug smirk, his gaze flitting between the couple. "You think this is over?" Kunnel sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You can't get rid of me that easily. Funmi is mine. She's always been mine." Funmi took a step forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I was never yours, Kunnel. You don't control me anymore, and you won't threaten my family." Kunnel's laugh echoed through the space. "You think you're free of me? I made you who you are. Without me, you'd be nothing." Dale stepped in front of Funmi, his voice firm. "You're wrong. She's stronger without you. And I'll make sure you never get near her again." Kunnel's expression darkened, his composure cracking. "You have no idea what I'm capable of," he hissed. "If I can't have her, no one will." The confrontation escalated as Kunnel lunged at Dele, his rage boiling over. The two men clashed in a chaotic struggle, their movements frantic and forceful. Funmi watched in horror, her heart pounding as the man she loved fought to protect her from the man she feared. Outside, the noise drew the attention of villagers who began to gather at the warehouse. Their murmurs grew louder as they approached, their torches illuminating the scene. The sight of Dele and Kunnel locked in a violent struggle shocked them into action. Kunnel momentarily overpowered Dele, his face twisted with rage. "You're nothing," he spat. "You can't protect her from me." But Dele, fueled by love and determination, pushed back. "I don't need to be stronger than you," he said through gritted teeth. "I just need to stand by her side." The struggle came to a halt as the villagers burst into the warehouse, their voices ringing with disbelief. An elder stepped forward, his voice commanding. "Enough of this madness. What is going on here?" Kunnel froze, his bravado faltering under the weight of the crowd's judgment. Dele stepped forward, his voice clear. This man has been threatening my wife, trying to destroy our family. The villagers murmured in anger, their eyes turning to Kunnel. His attempts to deny the accusations were drowned out by their disapproval. The elders demanded the authorities be called, and Kunnel was restrained, his threats turning into desperate protests. Funmi stood silently, her hands trembling as she watched the man who had haunted her for so long be taken away. Relief washed over her, though it was tempered by exhaustion and the weight of the ordeal. As the villagers dispersed, Dele turned to Funmi, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I am now," she whispered. "Because you were here." Dele pulled her into a tight embrace, the warmth of his presence easing the chill of the night. Together, they walked home under the glow of the moonlight, the shadows of Kunnel's threats finally fading. Though the journey ahead was uncertain, they knew they could face it, together. The morning after Kunnel's arrest brought a fragile sense of peace to the Ajayi household. Funmi sat at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. The silence of the house felt different, not oppressive, but reflective, as though it held space for healing to begin. Dele joined her, his movements tentative. Placing a plate of toast before her, he sat down, his gaze heavy with regret. "Funmi," he began, his voice raw with emotion, "I failed you. I wasn't there when you needed me most, and for that, I'm truly sorry." Funmi looked at him, her fingers tightening around the mug. "Dele, I didn't want to keep my past from you. I was scared, ashamed. But I see now that hiding it only built walls between us." Dele reached for her hand, his touch tentative but sincere. "We both made mistakes, Funmi, but I want us to move forward together. I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild what I broke." Over the next few days, their lives became a careful dance of reconciliation. Honest conversations stretched late into the night, filled with vulnerability and long-buried truths. They spoke of their fears, their mistakes, and the possibility of starting anew. One evening, as the sunset bathed their veranda in warm hues, Dele turned to Funmi. "I want us to rebuild, but this time without secrets. We can't change the past, but we can decide our future." Funmi hesitated, doubt flickering in her eyes. "Rebuilding isn't easy, Dele. The pain doesn't just disappear."